For many who lived in the lands between, the grace of the Erdtree would be something they would never receive. Condemned as graceless and impure, the only existence they would ever know would be one of persecution. But in the brutal snowfields of the north, in a secret land where only a chosen few were called to, was the promise of sanctuary, a place where those abandoned by grace would find their salvation. Miquella's Haligtree, created by the demigod himself to one day grow into a new Erdtree. The grace of the Haligtree wouldn't be spared from those who needed it, and its blessings would be strong enough to cure even the debilitating decay of scarlet rot that plagued Miquella's beloved sister, Malenia. Though the bright future under the rule of Miquella's Haligtree seemed within reach, it would forever remain unattainable to all who sought it, a dream to never flourish into reality, for Miquella would one day vanish, and Malenia, eternally devoted to her brother from birth, would spend the remainder of her days awaiting his return, unknowing that it would never come. Miquella and Malenia were the twin children born to Marika and Radagon, in what was each their second marriage. Though the twins had been born as Empyreans, a title that qualified them to ascend to godhood, the revered status did not spare them from affliction. Miquella had been cursed with eternal youth, never to grow beyond the stature of a frail child. Malenia had been born plagued with scarlet rot, an incurable decay that ate away at flesh, and from which there existed no promise of relief. But despite their ailments, Miquella and Malenia excelled in their pursuits. In her youth, Malenia had met a blind swordsman who had become her mentor, and with his flowing, dancing blade, he trained Malenia to move as if on wings, and her strength grew to be unparalleled. Though the scarlet rot had taken her limbs, she learned how to master the sword, and her reputation as an undefeated swordswoman spread throughout the land. Miquella pursued scholarship and remained close to his father Radagon, who later established the Golden Order, designed to be the perfect model of governance. But although it was touted to be flawless in its provisions, even the strictest adherence to the Golden Order had done nothing to cure his sister's suffering, and Miquella began to doubt the fundamentalist teachings that he had been raised on. He created a doctrine of unalloyed gold in order to search for a way to cure Malenia. Miquella developed needles of pure gold that could disrupt the meddling of outer gods, mysterious beings that would use manipulation to carry out their various wills. The unalloyed gold needles staved off even the spread of scarlet rot, which was itself the influence of the ancient god Rot, the very god that Malenia's mentor had sealed below the lands. For many, faith in the Erdtree had diminished, and the demigods were no exception to the skepticism of its guidance. Miquella was confident that he could create a more perfect Erdtree, and thus planted the sapling of the Haligtree, which he watered with his own blood. The Haligtree flourished and grew to tower magnificently above the ground. Its ornate promenades were adorned with sculptures in honor of its creator and his adored sister. Miquella's acceptance of Malenia, despite her scarlet rot, had been a symbol of hope for the unloved in the lands between. He became a savior to the meek and lowly. Those who had been abandoned by the Erdtree's selective grace would make a pilgrimage to the Haligtree as a refuge from their suffering. Miquella knew that if he could fasten himself within the heart of the Haligtree and wait, he would one day be transformed anew, and the vision of his order of unalloyed gold would be without flaw. So within the core of the tree he embedded himself, and Malenia, along with his devoted legion, would patiently wait out his slumber. While Miquella earned devotion through influence, Malenia earned it through battle. She titled herself the Blade of Miquella. Her very identity was no more than a physical extension of her brother's will. During the Shattering, she had led an army of clean rot knights, as fierce in battle as they were loyal, despite knowing that the inevitable decay would one day find them. Malenia and her knights remained undefeated in their campaign, and it was only upon reaching the red skies of Caelid that she would enter a battle in which she would not walk away the victor. General Radahn of Redmane Castle presided over Caelid, and his reputation as the most powerful of all demigods had been well earned. Malenia and Radahn fought to an exhausting standstill, but Malenia's own pride pushed her to conjure a brilliant flower of scarlet rot, an incantation that would blossom and rain decay over Caelid, and eventually devour away Radahn's sanity. Falling into a deep slumber after the Aeonian flower bloomed, Malenia was carried back to the Haligtree by her devoted knight, and there she remained, patiently awaiting the awakening of her brother from his chrysalis. But Miquella never awoke. In fact, the Haligtree had stopped growing. It was no longer thriving as it once had, for unknown to most, Miquella had been stolen from his sleep. cut out of the halig tree and carried away while Malenia had been battling abroad. Miquella had been spirited away by Mog, Lord of Blood, who belonged to a persecuted group known as the Omen. Born into a cursed existence and shunned by the grace of the Erd Tree, the Omen would only know a life of abuse and torment, and even those born into royalty would not be spared the cruelty inflicted upon their kind. Mog may have very well heard the tales of Miquella's status as a savior, and in deciding he would compromise as being his regal consort, stole the sleeping demigod in hopes of raising him to godhood, so that together they could lead the Mogwin dynasty. But though Mog tried to rouse him, Miquella remained asleep, never stirring in acknowledgement of his overtures. Even upon Mog's death at the hands of the Tarnished, Miquella's deep slumber could not be cured, and all dreams of the grace that the halig tree would offer to so many that needed it remained dormant with their creator. Malenia's battle with Radahn had left more than just scars upon the lands of Caelid. Out of the Aeonian swamp where the great scarlet flower bloomed, crawled life forms that had been born from the very rot that killed so many. Beings that longed for the warmth of a mother they believed had abandoned them. It was well known to them that Malenia was on the verge of ascending to godhood. The flower of scarlet rot needed but one more bloom before she would be christened as Scarlet Valkyrie, the very goddess of rot that her children longed to return. But Malenia didn't want the worship and servitude for what had plagued her as a curse all her life. She only wanted the fulfillment of the promise that Miquella made to her long ago. When the Tarnished advanced to the halig tree on behalf of the greater will to snuff out all demigods, Malenia would one final time use her flowing blade in a beautiful display of her unrivaled swordsmanship. Yet as had once happened to her long ago, Malenia was pushed to the verge of defeat, but her pride no longer commanded her. This final time, she would bloom the scarlet flower out of her anger and her determination to protect her brother. On wings of butterflies rose the goddess of rot, shedding her armor and finally embracing the decay that she had resisted her entire life. Although Malenia would be bested by the one who would be crowned Elden Lord, she only expressed awe at the display of strength she had lost too. Just as Miquella had fallen into his deep slumber that none could awake him from, Malenia joined her brother in sleep, the brilliant Aeonian scarlet flower gracing her place of rest. The halig tree would never again grow. The sanctuary of redeemed grace its boughs had once promised would never become a reality to the many that put their faith behind it. It was nothing more than a husk, an empty symbol for what might have been had fate been more kind to the Empyrean siblings. But perhaps one day, Miquella would return to fulfill his promise to Malenia. But to what world he would awaken to would remain a mystery to all but the Tarnished, who would be the only one to decide its very fate.